My best friend saved me from my mom's addiction and helped me raise my sister when we were teens. We made a blood pact that we each owed the other one favor. Years later, he called it in. His ex-girlfriend Chloe was missing, and he needed me to tell police he was at my place all weekend. When they found her body strangled with her own scarf at the quarry where we used to play as kids, he started showing up at my work, following my sister, and sending photos of her at dance class to make sure I kept my mouth shut. The day I lied for my best friend was the day I lost myself forever. Christian and I had been inseparable since we were 8 years old, the kind of friendship where you finish each other's sentences and know exactly what the other is thinking with just a glance. We used to race bikes through the woods behind his house and spend entire summers building elaborate tree houses that we swore would last forever. He was there when nobody else was. When I was 16, my mom's prescription med addiction spiraled completely out of control. She'd steal money from my college fund, forget to buy groceries for weeks, and once left my 10-year-old sister alone for 3 days while she disappeared on a bender. Christian was the only person who knew the truth. He'd show up with bags of groceries, pretending his mom accidentally bought too much. He'd forge my mom's signature on school forms, drive my sister to her dance classes, and once even paid our electricity bill when the lights got shut off. One night, after I found my mom passed out in the bathtub with the water still running, I asked Christian if he'd help me get custody of my sister if I went to child services. He didn't hesitate. He said yes immediately. That night, we made a blood pact. We each owed the other one favor. Anything, anytime, no questions asked. We even cut our palms and shook on it like idiots. I never imagined he'd collect. After I got custody of my sister, life slowly pieced itself back together. I became a pediatric nurse, moved into a decent apartment downtown, and started dating someone who actually treated me right. Christian, though, he spiraled. He dropped out of college, started hanging around people who made my skin crawl, and always seemed to have money despite never holding down a job. We drifted apart, but whenever we did talk, I could still see glimpses of the kid who saved my life, until the call that changed everything. Christian called me at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. His breathing was ragged, like he'd been running. "I need you," he whispered. "Remember our pact?" My blood went cold. He told me his ex-girlfriend Chloe had gone missing. The police were asking questions. He swore up and down that he had nothing to do with it, that she'd been mixed up with dangerous people, probably ran off with some dealer. But then he said the words that made my stomach drop. "I need you to tell them I was at your place all weekend, that we were binge-watching shows and ordering pizza." Every instinct screamed at me to hang up. Chloe was only 19, barely out of high school, sweet kid who worked at the coffee shop near my hospital. But Christian's voice cracked when he reminded me about my sister's dance recital he never missed, about the time he confronted my mom's dealer so he'd stop coming around, about everything he'd risked for me. "You owe me this," he said, "and God help me." I said yes. The next afternoon, I sat across from Detective Pickle in a sterile interview room that smelled like burnt coffee and desperation. My scrubs were still damp with sweat from my shift, but I blamed it on the broken AC at the hospital. I told her Christian had crashed at my place all weekend. We'd watched some true crime documentary. Ironic, right? Ordered pepperoni pizza from Giuseppe's. I even mentioned how he'd spilled ranch on my couch because details make lies believable. Detective Pickle barely looked up from her notepad, but I caught her exchanging glances with her partner through the one-way mirror. When she asked what time he'd left Sunday night, I said around 10 p.m. because he had work in the morning. The lie tasted like copper in my mouth. I texted Christian as soon as I got to my car. "It's done. Please tell me you're innocent." He responded instantly with a string of heart emojis and, "You saved my life. Chloe's fine. She just ran off. You'll see." But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing Chloe's face on a missing poster. 2 days later, my co-worker Jenny pulled me aside during break. Her cousin was a forensic tech, and word was spreading through the grapevine. They'd found blood in Christian's car. Not much, but enough. And Chloe's phone had last pinged from a tower near the old quarry outside town. The same quarry where Christian and I used to skip stones as kids. My hands shook so badly I dropped my coffee. Jenny thought I was just shocked. She had no idea I'd just become an accessory. That evening, 3 of Chloe's friends messaged me on Instagram. They'd seen my old photos with Christian. One girl, Aisha, sent me screenshots of texts Chloe had sent her the night she disappeared. "If something happens to me, it was Christian. He's been following me. I'm scared." Another friend sent voice messages Chloe had left, crying about how Christian wouldn't accept their breakup, how he'd shown up at her job, at her gym, even at her little brother's soccer practice. The last message made my blood run cold. He said if he can't have me, nobody can. I threw up in my kitchen sink. Then I called in sick for the next 3 days, paralyzed by what I'd done. But the worst part of me still wanted to believe Christian, still wanted to think this was all some misunderstanding. That's what happens when someone saves your life. You can't imagine them taking someone else's. A week later, they found her. A jogger's dog led them to a shallow grave near the quarry. Chloe had been strangled with her own scarf, the purple one with butterflies that she wore everywhere. The medical examiner estimated she'd been dead since the weekend I'd alibied for Christian, since the exact hours I'd sworn he was on my couch, safe and harmless, watching TV. I know what I have to do now. I have to walk into that police station and tell the truth. I have to face what I've done, what I've helped him do. I owe it to Chloe, to her family, to the girl I used to be before I became someone who covers for killers. Christian saved my life once, but I helped him end Chloe's. That's a debt I'll never be able to repay. I stared at my phone screen, my thumb hovering over Detective Pickle's contact information. The fluorescent lights in my kitchen buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the countertop where I'd spread out printouts of Chloe's messages. Each word felt like an accusation. My sister padded into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She grabbed orange juice from the fridge and poured herself a glass, completely completely unaware that her big sister had helped cover up a murder. I watched her move around the kitchen with the casual grace of a teenager who still believed the world made sense. The doorbell rang, making us both jump. Through the peephole, I saw Christian standing on my doorstep, hands shoved deep in his pockets. My sister started toward the door, but I grabbed her arm and steered her back to her room. She protested, but something in my expression must have scared her because she went without arguing. I opened the door just a crack. Christian's eyes were bloodshot, his usual confident swagger replaced by something desperate and wild. He pushed past me into my apartment before I could stop him. He paced my living room like a caged animal, running his hands through his unwashed hair. The smell of stale cigarettes and something else, something sharp and chemical, clung to his clothes. He kept muttering about how the police were watching him, how they'd been to his apartment 3 times already. I stood by the door, my hand still on the knob. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to grab my sister and get out. But Christian noticed my position and moved between me and the exit, not threatening exactly, but deliberate. He started talking about the old days, about all the times we'd had each other's backs. Remember when your mom's dealer came to the house? Remember when I stood between him and your sister? Remember the groceries, the forged signatures, the nights I stayed over to make sure you were safe? His words came faster and faster, a manic stream of shared memories weaponized into emotional manipulation. He pulled out his phone and showed me photos from our childhood. Us at the quarry, us in the treehouse, us with our bikes. Each image felt like another chain binding me to him. Then he showed me something else, screenshots of text messages I'd sent him over the years. Thank you for saving my life. I owe you everything. You're the only real family I have. He'd saved them all, creating an archive of my gratitude that now felt like evidence against me. My sister's bedroom door creaked open. She peeked out, probably wondering what was taking so long. Christian's demeanor shifted instantly. He smiled at her, that same charming smile that had fooled everyone for years. He asked about her dance recital next week, mentioned he'd already bought tickets. The threat was subtle but clear. He was still part of our lives, still had access, still knew our routines, our schedules, our vulnerabilities. My sister smiled back, oblivious, and asked if he'd be staying for dinner. I told her to go back to her room and finish her homework. After she left, Christian's mask slid again. He grabbed my wrist, not hard enough to leave marks, but firm enough to make his point. He reminded me that we were in this together now, that if he went down, I'd go down too. Accessory after the fact, obstruction of justice, perjury, my nursing license gone, my custody of my sister challenged. But it was what he didn't say that terrified me most. The way his eyes lingered on my sister's door, the way he mentioned how trusting she was, how she still thought of him as family, the unspoken promise that my cooperation was the only thing keeping her safe. He left after extracting another promise of silence from me. I deadbolted the door behind him and slid down to the floor, my legs too weak to hold me up. My sister found me there 20 minutes later and assumed I was having a bad day at work. She made me tea and told me about her history project, and I pretended everything was normal while my insides churned with guilt and fear. That night, I couldn't eat dinner. Every bite tasted like ash. I kept checking the locks, peering through the blinds, jumping at every sound. My sister noticed my paranoia, but attributed it to stress. She suggested we watch a movie together, something light and funny. I agreed, desperate for any distraction from the weight crushing my chest. Halfway through the movie, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It was a photo of Chloe's purple scarf, laid out on what looked like Christian's kitchen table. No words, just the image, a reminder of what he'd done and what I was now part of. I excused myself to the bathroom and dry heaved into the toilet. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The person staring back had hollow eyes and a guilty conscience that would never wash clean. I splashed cold water on my face and returned to the couch, where my sister had paused the movie to wait for me. She curled up against my side, the way she used to when she was little and scared of thunderstorms. I held her close, knowing I was the storm now, the danger I'd invited into our lives, the lie I'd told to protect a killer. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Detective Pickle. She wanted to follow up on a few details from my statement. Could I come by the station tomorrow? Just routine, she assured me. Nothing to worry about, but I knew better. I knew they were closing in, that my hastily constructed alibi was starting to crumble. I texted back that I'd be there, my hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to type the simple message. Then I deleted Christian's texts, the photos, everything, as if erasing the evidence from my phone could erase what I'd done. The morning brought no relief. I arrived at the police station 15 minutes early, my hands wrapped around a coffee cup I couldn't bring myself to drink. The lobby smelled like floor wax and anxiety. Other people waited in plastic chairs, their own troubles etched across their faces, but none of them had helped cover up a murder. Detective Pickle appeared exactly on time. She led me through a different route this time, past cubicles where officers typed reports and answered phones. Normal people doing normal jobs while I walked among them carrying the weight of Chloe's death. The interview room was smaller than before, no windows, just a metal table bolted to the floor and 2 chairs that scraped against concrete when moved. Detective Pickle settled across from me with a thick folder that she didn't open immediately. Instead, she studied my face like she was reading a map. She started with easy questions. How long had I known Christian? When did we last spend time together before that weekend? I stuck to my story, adding small details that felt true because they were built on real memories. The pizza place we'd ordered from dozens of times in high school. The way Christian always picked the olives off his slices. Then she opened the folder. Inside were photographs of Christian's car, close-ups of the trunk, the blood spatter pattern, a single earring caught in the carpet fibers. She spread them across the table methodically, watching my reaction to each image. My stomach clenched, but I forced myself to look confused. confused rather than guilty. I asked if Christian was in trouble. She didn't answer directly, just moved to the next set of photos. Security camera stills from various locations. Christian at a gas station. Christian at an ATM. The timestamps made my rehearsed timeline impossible. Detective Pickle pulled out a map of the city with red dots marking locations. She traced routes with her finger, showing how Christian's movements that weekend created a pattern that led to the quarry, a pattern that proved he wasn't on my couch watching documentaries. I felt the walls of my lie crumbling, but couldn't find a way out. She asked me again about specific times, what episodes we watched, what toppings were on the pizza, whether Christian had seemed upset or distracted. Each question tightened the noose I'd placed around my own neck. When she finally dismissed me, I stumbled out of the station on unsteady legs. My phone had 17 missed calls from Christian. I didn't return them. Instead, I drove to work and tried to lose myself in the routine of caring for sick children. Their innocent faces made the guilt burn hotter. During my lunch break, I sat in my car and watched the news on my phone. They were running Chloe's photo again. Her parents had given an interview, begging for justice. Her mother's eyes were swollen from crying. Her father's hands shook as he held up a recent picture of their daughter, the same purple scarf visible around her neck. Christian appeared at the hospital that afternoon. He waited by my car in the parking garage, hood pulled up despite the warm weather. When I approached, he grabbed my elbow and steered me between two vans where security cameras couldn't see us. His paranoia had intensified. He spoke in rapid whispers about how the police were building a case, how someone must have talked, how we needed to get our stories straight. He'd prepared a timeline on his phone, complete with fake receipts he'd created and screenshots of movies we'd supposedly watched. I nodded along, terrified of what would happen if I refused. He made me repeat the story back to him 3 times, correcting small details until I had it memorized. The whole time, his grip on my arm never loosened. When he finally let go, I could see the red marks his fingers had left. That evening, I picked up my sister from dance practice and noticed a familiar car following us. Christian stayed 3 vehicles back, but took every turn we did. At a red light, I caught his eyes in my rearview mirror. He held up his phone and pointed to it, a reminder that he had evidence of my lies. My sister chatted about her routine for the upcoming recital, oblivious to the danger circling us. I drove past our apartment building twice, hoping Christian would give up and leave. He didn't. Finally, I had no choice but to go home, knowing he was watching from the street below. Inside, I double-checked all the locks and pulled the curtains closed. My sister asked why I was being weird. I blamed it on a difficult day at work, another lie added to the growing pile. She went to her room to practice while I stood guard by the window, watching Christian's car idle in the darkness. My phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, then listened with trembling fingers. It was one of Chloe's friends, the one who'd sent me the screenshots. She wanted to meet. She had more information about Christian, things Chloe had told her in confidence, things the police needed to know. I deleted the message immediately, then realized that made me look guilty. Everything I did now felt like evidence of my complicity. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus on the TV show my sister wanted to watch together, couldn't stop checking the window to see if Christian was still there. He was. Around midnight, after my sister had gone to bed, I received a text from Christian, a photo of my sister at her dance studio, taken from outside the window. The message was clear, without words. He knew her schedule. He knew where to find her when I wasn't around. He owned us both now. I spent the rest of the night awake, sitting in the hallway between my sister's room and the front door. Every sound in the building made me jump. Every car passing on the street could be Christian circling back. By morning, exhaustion made my hands shake and my vision blur. At work, I made mistakes, mixed up medication schedules, forgot to chart vital signs. My supervisor pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay. I wanted to tell her the truth, to confess everything and beg for help. Instead, I mumbled about insomnia and promised to do better. Jenny found me crying in the supply closet during afternoon break. She assumed it was about Chloe, and in a way, she was right. She told me more details her cousin had shared. They'd found defensive wounds on Chloe's hands. She'd fought back. She'd tried to live. The information made me sob harder. Christian called while Jenny was still comforting me. I let it ring, but he called again immediately. Then again. Jenny noticed my phone lighting up repeatedly and asked who was so persistent. I lied and said it was a telemarketer, but she saw Christian's name on the screen. Her expression changed. She knew Christian and I were friends. She knew about the blood in his car. I watched her connect dots that led to an ugly picture. She didn't say anything, just squeezed my shoulder and left me alone in the closet with my guilt and fear. The calls continued all afternoon. Texts followed. Christian wanted to meet. He needed to know what Detective Pickle had asked. He needed to know if I'd stayed strong. Each message sounded more desperate than the last, more dangerous. I left work early, claiming a migraine. Instead of going home, I drove aimlessly through the city, trying to think of a way out. Every option led to disaster. Tell the truth and lose everything. Keep lying and lose my soul. There was no path that didn't end in destruction. My sister called, wondering where I was. She'd taken the bus home from school and found the apartment empty. I told her I'd be home soon, then sat in a parking lot for another hour, paralyzed by indecision. Christian's car appeared in my rearview mirror like a nightmare made real. He parked beside me and got out, walking to my passenger door. I had no choice but to unlock it. He slid inside, bringing the smell of desperation and sleepless nights. His clothes were the same ones he'd worn yesterday, maybe the day before. Time was blurring for both of us. He talked about running, about disappearing before the police could build their case. He had money saved, he said, enough for both of us to start over somewhere new. The suggestion made my skin crawl. He wasn't offering escape. Christian's showing up at work with a whole new timeline and fake receipts like he's running some kind of murder cover-up franchise, complete with employee training sessions in parking garages. He was threatening threatening to take me with him. I reminded him about my sister, about my job, about the life I'd built. He dismissed each concern with increasing agitation. None of that mattered if we were in prison, he said. None of that mattered if we didn't stick together. His hand found my wrist again, squeezing just hard enough to hurt. A security guard knocked on my window, startling us both. He asked if everything was okay. Christian smiled and said we were just talking. The guard looked at me for confirmation. I nodded, another small betrayal of myself. He walked away, but I saw him glance back twice. After Christian left, I drove home to find my sister doing homework at the kitchen table. She looked up with concern and asked if I was sick. I must have looked terrible because she immediately got up to make me tea. Her kindness broke something inside me. While she fussed with the kettle, I thought about what I was teaching her through my actions. That loyalty meant covering for killers. That friendship was worth more than justice. That protecting yourself mattered more than protecting others. Every value I'd tried to instill in her was being corrupted by my choices. Detective Pickle called while we were drinking tea. She wanted me to come in again tomorrow. New evidence had surfaced. She thought I might be able to help clarify some inconsistencies. Her tone was professionally neutral, but I heard the trap being set. She knew I was lying. She was giving me a chance to come clean. My sister watched me after I hung up. She was smart, too smart to miss the signs of my distress. She asked who kept calling and texting, asked why I seemed scared, asked if someone was bothering me. I wanted to protect her from the truth, but my lies were already failing to keep her safe. That night, I found Christian parked outside again. This time, I went down to confront him. The street was empty except for a few passing cars. He rolled down his window but didn't get out. We needed to talk about tomorrow, he said, about what I would tell Detective Pickle. He'd prepared a script for me, explanations for the inconsistencies, reasons why the security footage didn't matter, ways to cast doubt on the timeline. He made me repeat key phrases while he corrected my delivery. The whole interaction felt like preparing for a performance where my life was at stake. A neighbor walked by with her dog, eyeing us suspiciously. Christian waited until she passed, then grabbed my hand through the window. His skin was clammy, his grip desperate. He reminded me again about everything he'd done for my family, about the dealer he'd confronted, about the nights he'd protected us. But those memories felt tainted now. Every good deed recontextualized as currency in a transaction I'd never agreed to. He'd been building this debt for years, knowing someday he'd need to collect. The Christian I'd loved like a brother had maybe never existed at all. I pulled away and went back inside, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed calculating the cost of truth versus lies. My nursing license would be revoked. My sister might be placed in foster care. I'd probably serve jail time, but Chloe's family would have justice. Her parents would know what happened to their daughter. The next morning arrived too quickly. I dropped my sister at school and watched her disappear through the doors, wondering if it would be the last normal morning of her life. Then I drove to the police station, Christian's script running through my head like a prayer I didn't believe in. Detective Pickle waited in the same small room. This time, she had a laptop open in front of her. She turned the screen toward me and played security footage from the gas station. There was Christian, clear as day, buying energy drinks and cigarettes. The timestamp destroyed our movie night alibi. She played more footage. Christian at the ATM, withdrawing cash. Christian buying rope and plastic sheeting at a hardware store. Each video chipped away at the story I'd told. She asked me to explain how he could be in two places at once. Asked if I wanted to reconsider my statement. The walls felt like they were closing in. Christian's script crumbled in my mouth. I stammered through explanations that sounded ridiculous even to me. Maybe I'd mixed up the dates. Maybe Christian had left briefly and I'd dozed off. Maybe I was remembering wrong. Detective Pickle's expression never changed, but disappointment radiated from her posture. She pulled out a form and slid it across the table. An opportunity to amend my statement, to correct any misunderstandings, to tell the truth before it was too late. I stared at the form while my future branched into two paths. One led to immediate destruction, but eventual peace. The other led to continued lies and living under Christian's control. My hand hovered over the pen she offered. All I had to do was write the truth. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. I glanced down and saw a photo of my sister entering her school. Christian had people watching her. The message was clear. I pushed the form back unsigned and stuck to my lies, each word adding another bar to my prison. Detective Pickle gathered her materials slowly, giving me every opportunity to change my mind. When I didn't, she thanked me for my time and showed me out. We both knew this wasn't over. The evidence would eventually overwhelm my false alibi. It was just a matter of time. Outside the station, I sat in my car and screamed until my throat burned. A woman walking by looked alarmed, but I couldn't stop. All the fear and guilt and rage poured out in a sound that didn't seem human. When it finally ended, I felt empty, hollowed out like someone had scooped away everything that made me myself. Christian called before I'd even left the parking lot. He wanted to know everything, what questions they'd asked, what evidence they'd shown, whether I'd held strong. I told him about the videos, about the form, about the choice I'd made. He exhaled with relief and said I'd done the right thing, but there was nothing right about any of this. I'd chosen my sister's safety over justice for Chloe. I'd chosen my own freedom over the truth. Every choice felt like a betrayal of someone. There was no winning, only different ways of losing. I drove to the hospital but couldn't make myself go inside. Called in sick from the parking lot, adding another lie to my collection. My supervisor sounded concerned. This wasn't like me, she said. I'd always been reliable, always been someone she could count on. Past tense. Everything good about me was shifting into past tense. Instead of going home, I drove to the quarry. Police tape still marked off sections of the walking path. A small memorial had formed near where they'd found her. Flowers and stuffed animals and photos of Chloe smiling. I stood there among the offerings, wondering if my confession would be worth worth adding to the pile. A jogger passed, giving me a wide berth. I probably looked unstable, standing there talking to myself, but I needed to tell Chloe I was sorry. Sorry for the lie. Sorry for the cover-up. Sorry for choosing my own family over justice for hers. The words felt hollow against the weight of what I'd done. My phone rang constantly. Christian checking in. My sister wondering where I was. Work calling about my absence. I ignored them all and walked deeper into the quarry, following paths Christian and I had explored as children. Every landmark held a memory that now felt poisoned. There was the rock where we'd carved our initials, the tree we'd climbed to see who could go higher, the stream where we'd built dams and caught minnows. This place had been our kingdom once. Now it was Chloe's grave, and I'd helped her killer stay free. I found myself at the exact spot where they'd discovered her body. The earth had been disturbed by the investigation, leaving a depression in the ground. I knelt there and pressed my palms into the dirt, trying to feel something beyond my own selfish fear, trying to connect with the girl whose life had been stolen. But all I felt was the weight of my choices pressing down like the earth that had covered her. I'd made myself an accomplice to murder. No amount of regret would change that. No apology would bring her back. I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The sun was setting by the time I returned to my car. Missed calls and texts filled my screen. Christian had escalated from checking in to making threats. If I didn't respond, he'd assume I'd betrayed him. If he assumed that, my sister wouldn't be safe. The trap I'd built was perfect in its simplicity. I drove home to find Christian waiting in my apartment. My sister had let him in, still trusting the man who'd been like family for so many years. They were sitting at the kitchen table, looking at old photo albums. The domestic scene made bile rise in my throat. My sister looked up from the photo album, her face bright with nostalgia. She pointed to a picture of Christian pushing her on a swing when she was 7. I watched him lean closer to her, his hand resting on the back of her chair, and felt my protective instincts surge. I suggested my sister go start her homework in her room. She rolled her eyes at my obvious attempt to get rid of her, but complied after Christian promised to look at more photos with her later. The casual promise made my skin crawl. Once we were alone, Christian's demeanor shifted. He closed the photo album and leaned back, studying me with calculating eyes. He pulled out his phone and showed me a news article about the investigation. The police were interviewing everyone who knew Chloe. They were building a timeline of her last days. He scrolled to another article. This one mentioned that investigators were looking for inconsistencies in witness statements, that they had new technology to analyze security footage, that they were close to making an arrest. His thumb hovered over my name in the article, listed as someone who'd provided an alibi. Christian's really pulling out the full stalker starter pack here, lurking outside apartments, sending creepy photos of her sister, and now he's flipping through family photo albums like some twisted episode of This Is Your Life But Make It. I moved to the kitchen sink, needing distance between us. Christian followed, cornering me against the counter. He spoke in low tones about loyalty, about family, about debts that could never be repaid. His words felt rehearsed, like he'd been practicing this speech in his car. My phone vibrated on the counter. Jenny's name appeared on the screen. Christian saw it too, and his jaw tightened. He knew she worked at the hospital, knew her cousin was involved in the investigation. The unspoken threat hung between us as the phone continued to buzz. I let it go to voicemail. Christian relaxed slightly, but his eyes never left my face. He talked about the future, about how we'd get through this together, how in a few months, when the investigation went cold, everything would go back to normal. The delusion in his voice was terrifying. My sister's door opened and she called out asking about dinner. Christian immediately brightened, offering to order Chinese food from our favorite place. He still remembered our usual orders after all these years. My sister eagerly agreed before I could object. While Christian placed the order on his phone, I checked on my sister. She was sprawled on her bed, textbooks scattered around her. She looked up and asked if Christian was okay, said he seemed different, sadder somehow. The observation made my chest tight. I helped her with her math homework, trying to maintain normalcy while Christian's presence loomed in the next room. Every few minutes I'd hear him moving around, opening drawers, touching things, making himself at home in our space like he belonged there. The food arrived 40 minutes later. Christian paid, waving off my attempts to contribute. We sat around the table, my sister chattering about school while Christian and I picked at our food. He kept steering the conversation to shared memories, inside jokes my sister didn't understand. After dinner, my sister cleared the table while Christian helped, falling into old patterns from when he practically lived with us during high school. I watched them work together, saw how easily my sister trusted him, and felt the weight of my choices crushing me. Christian's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and his face went pale. He stepped onto the balcony to take the call, closing the sliding door behind him. Through the glass, I could see him pacing, gesturing wildly, his voice raised, though I couldn't make out the words. My sister noticed too. She asked if everything was all right with him. I made up something about work stress, another lie added to the pile. She accepted it easily, still young enough to believe adults had simple problems with simple solutions. Christian came back inside, his face flushed and hands shaking. He announced he had to leave, something about a family emergency. The lie was transparent. He hugged my sister goodbye, holding on a hit too long, then turned to me with eyes that promised this wasn't over. After he left, I deadbolted the door and put the chain on. My sister asked why I was being so paranoid lately. I told her there had been break-ins in the neighborhood, hating myself for the fear I saw creep into her eyes. That night, I sat in the hallway outside my sister's room again. Every sound made me jump. Every car passing could be Christian returning. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Just coordinates and a time, 5 a.m. I recognized the location immediately. The old treehouse in the woods behind Christian's childhood home, where we'd made our blood pact all those years ago, where this all started. The symmetry poetry felt intentional, like Christian was orchestrating some kind of poetic ending. I didn't sleep. Instead, I wrote a letter to my sister explaining everything. If something happened to me, she needed to know the truth. I sealed it in an envelope and hid it in her desk drawer, underneath her journal where she'd find it eventually. At 4:30 a.m., I slipped out of the apartment. The streets were empty except for a few early morning joggers. I drove to Christian's old neighborhood, my hands steady on the wheel despite the fear coursing through me. I'd made my choice. The woods were darker than I remembered. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate the familiar path, muscle memory guiding me past trees we'd climbed and streams we'd crossed 1,000 times. The treehouse loomed above, its wooden boards weathered but still solid. Christian was already there, sitting on the platform with his legs dangling over the edge. He didn't look up when I climbed the ladder, just patted the spot beside him like we were kids again, meeting for another adventure. I sat down carefully, the old boards creaking under our adult weight. Christian pulled out a flask and took a long drink before offering it to me. I declined. He shrugged and took another swig, his movements loose and uncoordinated. He started talking about Chloe, how she'd threatened to ruin his life, how she'd said things about him that weren't true, how he'd only wanted to talk to her that night, to make her understand. The confession spilled out of him like poison being purged. I listened without interrupting, my phone recording in my pocket. He described following her to the quarry, how she'd laughed at him, called him pathetic, how something inside him had snapped, how afterwards he'd sat with her body for hours, trying to understand what he'd done. The sun was starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Christian turned to me with tears streaming down his face. He begged me to understand, said I was the only person who really knew him, the only person who could forgive him. I thought about my sister waking up alone in the apartment, about Chloe's parents who would never see their daughter graduate college, about the person I'd become by protecting a killer. The choice was clearer than it had ever been. Christian must have seen it in my eyes because his expression hardened. He reminded me that I was an accomplice now, that I'd lied to the police, that my sister would lose everything if I betrayed him. The threats felt hollow now, the words of a desperate man who'd run out of moves. I stood up slowly, testing the stability of the old boards. Christian grabbed my wrist, his grip weak from exhaustion and alcohol. I pulled free easily and moved toward the ladder. He called after me, alternating between threats and pleas, but I didn't look back. The drive to the police station felt both endless and too quick. I parked in the visitor lot and sat for a moment, gathering courage. My phone had dozens of missed calls from Christian, each voicemail more frantic than the last. I deleted them without listening. Detective Pickle was just arriving for her shift when I intercepted her in the parking lot. She took one look at my face and led me inside without questions. We went to the same small interview room, but this time I was ready to use it for its intended purpose. I placed my phone on the table and played Christian's confession. Detective Pickle listened without interrupting, her expression carefully neutral. When it finished, she asked if I was ready to give a corrected statement. I nodded, the relief almost overwhelming. The truth came out in a rush. How I'd lied about the alibi, how Christian had manipulated me using our history, how he'd threatened my sister's safety, how I'd been too scared and too grateful to do the right thing. Detective Pickle took notes, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly just letting me talk. When I finished, she explained what would happen next. I'd likely face charges for obstruction of justice and perjury. My nursing license would be suspended pending investigation. But she also said the prosecutor would take my cooperation into consideration, that my recording of Christian's confession would be crucial evidence. 2 hours later, I watched from the window as police cars surrounded the treehouse. Christian came down without resistance, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He looked small in handcuffs, nothing like the boy who'd once protected my family. I called my supervisor from the station parking lot and explained everything. She listened in shocked silence, then told me to take all the time I needed. The hospital would be there when I was ready to face the consequences. Her kindness made me cry for the first time since this all began. My sister was eating cereal when I got home. She took one look at my face and knew something had changed. I sat down across from her and told her the truth, all of it. She deserved to know who I really was and what I'd done. She listened without interrupting, her cereal growing soggy in the bowl. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took my hand, said she was proud of me for finally doing the right thing, said Mom would have been proud too. The next few weeks blurred together. Lawyer consultations, court appearances, meetings with prosecutors. Christian pled guilty to avoid trial, sparing Chloe's family from hearing the details. He was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole in 25 years. I pled guilty to obstruction of justice and perjury. The judge considered my cooperation and clean record. I received 2 years probation and 300 hours of community service. My nursing license was suspended for a year, with the possibility of reinstatement after review. The hardest part was facing Chloe's parents at the sentencing. They sat in the gallery, holding each other as the judge read Christian's verdict. Afterwards, Chloe's mother approached me in the hallway. I braced for anger, but she just looked tired. She thanked me for finally telling the truth, said it didn't bring Chloe back, but at least they had answers. I found work at a grocery store while my license was suspended. The pay was terrible and the work monotonous, but it felt like appropriate penance. My coworkers didn't know my story, which was a relief. Meeting at the old tree house where you made childhood blood pacts is definitely not ominous at all. Christian really went for the full dramatic movie villain location choice here, complete with the sunrise timing and everything. I could just be another person stocking shelves and mopping floors. My sister adjusted better than I'd expected. She threw herself into dance, using movement to process emotions she couldn't put into words. I went to every recital, sitting in the audience with other proud families, grateful I was still allowed to be part of her life. 6 months into my probation, I started volunteering volunteering at a domestic violence shelter as part of my community service. The women there had their own stories of choosing survival over truth. We didn't talk about our pasts, just focused on building better futures. Jenny reached out after the trial ended. She said she'd suspected something was wrong but hadn't known how to help. We met for coffee and slowly began rebuilding our friendship. She kept me updated on hospital news, promising my job would be waiting when I was ready. The treehouse was torn down by the city, deemed a safety hazard after the arrest. I drove by one day and saw the empty space where it had stood. The woods looked different without it, like an important piece of history had been erased. Maybe that was for the best. On the anniversary of Chloe's death, I visited her grave. Someone had left fresh flowers and a new purple scarf draped over the headstone. I added my own bouquet and stood there in the rain, finally able to mourn the girl whose life had been stolen. My sister graduated high school with honors. As she walked across the stage, I thought about all the moments that had led to this one, the choices made and unmade, the lies told and truths finally spoken, the debts that could never really be repaid. Christian wrote me one letter from prison. I threw it away unopened.